2020 was a rough year on all of us in many different ways, but it really saved the worst for last. On Christmas Day, the beloved bluegrass guitarist and iconic superhero Tony Rice passed away. His music has influenced and inspired millions of people and has even gone as far as to change the course of people's careers and lives, and I'm absolutely one of those. No other single musician has had such a profound impact on me as he has. Today I want to share the records of his that caused those career-changing moments for me, as well as to take a look at some of his albums or material that he was on that I think goes overlooked a little bit, in hopes of drawing some more attention to those. So join me today as we take a look at the master Tony Rice. There were two albums that were solely responsible for keeping me interested and forever a part of the bluegrass genre. And those two albums are Tony Rice Plays and Sings Bluegrass, and if you open it up you get a full-length picture of him instead of just the standard picture like that. And the band that he produced, the Bluegrass Album Band, this is their Volume 5, Sweet Sunny South. Both of these albums, the music on them is certainly inspired by and directly from the earliest roots of bluegrass, but it took that, and it took those sounds and ideas and polished them with virtuosic sensibilities and a refined sound that forever changed the approach to performing and arranging bluegrass music. And it also forever kept me interested in the genre. These two albums were something wild for me, and let me explain why. So I had been exposed to these ever since I was a kid. I had listened to them on and off in passing, but it really wasn't until around college that I truly appreciated the magnitude and just how influential and consequential these two albums were. Remember I said in my very first vlog about how I had been listening to just avant-garde nonstop, like John Cage and Morton Feldman, just lots of crazy music nonstop. And then finally I needed some bluegrass, I thought, or I just needed something different to change that. The album I turned on that I mentioned that, just really clicked was this one, Tony Rice Plays and Sings Bluegrass. And it was at that moment that I realized that that was the sound I had been missing and wanting that whole time. That album brought me back to bluegrass and will undoubtedly keep me there forever. Anytime I listen to either of these two albums, and I listen to them regularly, they never do get old, and every time I turn them on, it's truly a master class in how to perform and arrange bluegrass music. There's the greatest guitar player in the history of bluegrass playing rhythm and these amazing solos, so you can learn so much from that. Then you have this genius, legendary, and honestly futuristic violinist, Vassar Clements, playing the greatest fiddle solos you've ever heard. The whole band, just the entire arrangement is just absolutely superb. Tony Rice Plays and Sings Bluegrass is kind of a bittersweet album though, for two reasons. First of all, it's the only album of his that was ever nominated for a Grammy. That was in the 1994 Grammys. Now I'm sure Tony probably did not care so much about whether it won or didn't, and I absolutely am sure that he didn't make music to be considered for Grammys, but it still would have been really fitting for him to have won. And looking at the other contenders, I think Tony's album was the clear winner, but that's just my opinion. A second bittersweet thing is that he did sing a few other tracks on some other albums after this, but this was the last full-length album under his own name that he sang on. So there is that, which is quite sad. But otherwise, this is absolutely, I have not heard a bluegrass album that has captivated me as much as this one has. I put those two albums together because they both had the most impact on me to stay in the bluegrass genre, and they had more or less the same musicians on both. There were two other albums that, surprise, surprise, had Tony Rice on them that were also just as much as important to me as the previous two I mentioned. And those two are Dancing on the Fingerboard by Tony's longtime fiddle player Ricky Simpkins, as well as an album that I have covered on my rounder video for one of my top rounder choices. That's of course Bela Fleck Drive. On here are some of the absolute greatest bluegrass guitar solos that I think will ever be recorded in the history of bluegrass. Looking back though, I think in my own personal timeline, as it was the case for many other people as well, I actually discovered Tony Rice's music long before the the 4 albums that I mentioned a bit ago. I discovered it first. I mean, he had been a name I'd been around since birth, basically, but I think I first really fell in love with his guitar playing through the David Grisman Quintet, which is a source that a lot of people will cite as their first introduction to Tony Rice. Of course, there's the iconic first album from the David Grisman Quintet, but I actually want to point out two subsequent releases that I have listened to, honestly, a lot more than that original LP. First is a thorough box set, basically, of live recordings that group made at the Great American Music Hall. I believe it's 4 shows, and it's really interesting to hear the same songs. I think they were playing this either weekly or maybe even nightly, and so they've got the same set list and they're just going through it day after day. And of course, you get excellent at these tunes after something like that, a rigorous routine like that. So it's really interesting to go and listen to not only Tony, who's playing just absolutely amazingly on all of these tracks, but to listen to all of the artists actually and how their solos are different, how they're the same sometimes. It's just really interesting to hear kind of like the evolution of their sound each night. Then, an even more interesting release is that came out after that was a 25th anniversary reunion concert that was put out as well from the same people. And of course, all of their styles had slightly changed. Parts of it were still the same sounding, but a lot of it had, evolved and changed. So it was really interesting again to hear how those musicians have changed and how they sound 25 years later playing the same songs heard on that very first LP. I don't think that these subsequent releases have been heard by as many people, partly because they well, the one has kind of a CD pressing, but the majority of it is digital only. The first album, of course, was on LP and then CD, but the Great American Music Hall concerts were on download only, and the 25th anniversary was on CDR, kind of limited, but mostly download as well. But those are just absolutely must listen to. I think it's just some incredible music from Tony Rice as well as the David Grisman Quintet. I'll have links to those so you can go take a listen to what I'm talking about. If we go back in my timeline, even before the discovery of the David Grisman Quintet, we find the very first bluegrass record that I ever truly enjoyed and admired and appreciated, and do so to this day, and that is on Rounder Records, the legendary and iconic 0044 by J.D. Crowe and the New South. And guess what? Tony Rice is on that too. It's no exaggeration to say that Tony Rice has had more of an influence on me than anyone else, with Vassar Clements coming right behind him. This album, it's one of the first bluegrass memories I have in my life, hearing this, and it's just as interesting and mesmerizing hearing it today as it was the very first time. In fact, Alison Krauss cites it as probably the most important release ever in bluegrass history, and I quite agree with that. Now we'll fast forward to more recent years and take a look at the albums that Tony has been on that were and are still on constant rotation for me. First up is the duet he did with fellow David Grisman Quintet alumni guitarist John Carlini. This is on Sugar Hill Records. It's titled River Suite for Two Guitars. I think this is a very overlooked album in Tony Rice's discography, and the only thing I can think of is it's not hard driving bluegrass, it's not traditional hardcore bluegrass, so probably the bluegrass police have issued a penalty for this one. But for me, I think it is one of his best albums. It truly shows his versatility and proficiency in genres other than bluegrass, which frankly, a lot of bluegrass guitarists are not jazz guitarists, and that's totally fine. They do what they do. But Tony was not only a perfect bluegrass guitar player, but he very much holds his own in a jazz context too. This CD does have like 1 or 2 bluegrass sounding songs, but for the most part it's acoustic jazz for 2 guitars, and it's incredible. The playing on this is just truly virtuosic. There has since been a release on acoustic disc from David Grisman's label that is a live version of this album. I think it's actually identical track listing, the same songs but just done in a live setting, so it's cool to hear them do that. But again, I just strongly recommend hearing that record. Also, speaking of acoustic disc, I forget the original release date, but years ago there was a very legendary and somewhat infamous recording that came out titled The Pizza Tapes. And if you don't know the story behind that, I suggest you pause the video, go look that up. There are variations to that story, some with mostly truth, some with some exaggeration and embellishment, so I will let you find your version and choose whether to believe it or not. But nonetheless, it was a very impromptu session between Tony Rice, Jerry Garcia, and David Grisman. And before I forget, I did forget to mention it on that Tony Rice Plays and Sings Bluegrass album. If you open the liner notes, you discover a very interesting thing, which made me think from what the Pizza Tapes here, is that the liner notes say in that album, which sounds like it's, you know, the most pristinely rehearsed and perfected album, that they went in and did this mostly on the first take. There was no arrangements, no, you know, you take this half of the solo, I'll take that half, you sing here, I'll sing here. They just went in and did this, and the fact that it came out so perfectly, that just speaks volumes. There's no further comment needed on that. Just absolutely incredible. Well, similar to this album, very impromptu, informal, but the recordings are just incredible, and it definitely made for a very great release. I would contend that the Pizza Tapes is one of the top albums in history. I love it. I think it's just absolutely great. It's so good that there's now a 3 CD set called the Extra Large Edition, so absolutely, you might as well get the Extra Large pizza when it comes to people like Tony Rice, David Grisman, and Jerry Garcia. It's just such a fun album to listen to. That's definitely something from Tony I recommend. The last thing we're going to look at are some albums that Tony was a guest on or a collaborator on, but not albums that were directly under his own name as release. In fact, I think if you take a look at his official discography, there's actually, in my opinion, quite few titles, especially for someone as iconic as him. You would think there'd be maybe a little bit more. And it's a similar story with Vassar Clements, one of the world's greatest fiddlers, and really not that many albums for as long as he was fiddling. But if you take a look at how many albums that either Vassar or Tony guested on, well, then you start getting into the hundreds, or apparently in Vassar's case, he was on over 2,000, which is just unbelievable. That's amazing. But I want to mention some of the albums that Tony was a part of that are just absolutely amazing examples of his perfect contributions whenever he was in the studio. First up is this one here from Alan Bybee, the great mandolin player. This is on Sugar Hill, titled In the Blue Room. And Tony plays on a few of the cuts on this, including the very first track, and the solo is absolutely just absurd. I mean, it is just off the walls with licks and brilliant ideas, and I think it's a textbook example to prove that no one will ever come close to the ideas musically that Tony had in his head. It's just absolutely incredible. The other series of projects that I want to point to, I think were started on Webco Records, but then went to Pinecastle Records, and those were under Bill Emerson, the great banjo player's leadership. And Tony was often the guitar player on those albums, and not only did you get, again, that perfect hard-driving bluegrass rhythm that he was famous for, but also some incredible, flawless, impeccable guitar solos on some super fast Flat and Scruggs tunes, Jimmy Martin tunes. So those were some just stellar albums out of Tony's discography, in my opinion, with Bill Emerson. Of course, if you go back to my Rounder video, I mentioned as some of my favorite albums ever are the Rice, Hillman, and Peterson collaborations. They made 3 of those. They could have made 300 of those, and I still wouldn't have had enough of those 4 legendary people. And then, of course, the 2 duets between Peter Rowan and Tony Rice. Those were also equally incredible. And again, they could have made 2 or 200, 2,000 for all I care. And I still would have never grown tired of hearing that amazing collaboration. I've recently been showing the music of Tony Rice to friends of mine that are either jazz guitarists or rock guitarists or heavy metal guitarists, people that have never even heard of his name before, and the moment they see his amazing playing, they are instantly hooked and have an immediate appreciation for what he's done. For me to tell you about all of the influences and things that Tony has changed in my perception of music and bluegrass, etc. It would take hours and hours and hours. And I'm not going to do that, but I am going to have a very, very special guest on my show next week, and that is someone who has played in the Tony Rice unit for quite some time. We will catch up with them, hear some memories about Tony Rice, but also hear about the current work they're doing. Who is this person? Tune in next week and find out. As always, thank you so much for watching, and continue playing those amazing Tony Rice records. Thanks.